Hello, and welcome to Horror Rewind. This is Kelly Florence, and today we have a guest co host.
Yeah, Mark Florence, Kelly's husband, back again with you all.
Welcome. And this week we're talking about Mark's pick, Night of the Creeps. Now, I don't think I ever saw this movie, but Mark, you have a story about it.
Yeah, when I probably third, fourth, fifth grade, I think I recorded it off of TV, and in the summer we watched it like every day, and I remembered a lot of the lines and the scenes, so it's pretty funny.
That's awesome. So, Night of the Creeps, it has this very. I remember the box, the VHS box art, and it's got a guy in a tux, and he's obviously dead. He's a zombie, and the tagline is, "The good news is your date is here. The bad news is he's dead," and that ends up being a variation of the line used in the movie. It's hilarious. So this movie came out in 1986. It has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. It had a $5 million budget, and it only ended up taking in $500,000 at the box office. So it was considered a flop, but it has become a cult favorite. A couple of facts about this movie. It was written and directed by Fred Dekker, who is also the director of Monster Squad. You can tell if you're a horror movie fan watching this movie, all of the character names are homages to horror directors. It's just sort of a nice love letter to the genre of horror. It also has a lot of B-movie references, and it's a comedy, so there's just so much to take in and notice in this movie. It was a lot of fun to watch for the first time.
Yeah, it was, a lot of classic Americana from the 50s. In the beginning scenes, if we want to get into the movie a little bit, starts out in black and white in 1959 when an alien spaceship releases a pod and it's hurling through space towards Earth. Then they cut to the 1950s Put Your Head on My Shoulder song with a guy named Johnny on Route 66. Brings his girlfriend a make-out point. So it's pretty classic in that sense.
It has these little alien guys in the beginning, and I noticed, I really appreciated the credit fonts. It's a very nice credit sequence. And in the beginning, or at one point, rather, there's a woman watching Plan 9 from outer space. One of, Ed Wood's most famous movie, of course. Also, just another hidden gem. Greg Nicotero is in this movie, and he's playing a zombie. And this is the guy who produces The Walking Dead. So it's a nice little interesting point. These frat guys, skipping to the present, these frat guys remind me of the Trump brothers. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely very cliche 1980s frat bros. The first one you're introduced to is named Steve, and he's like a football player. He's wearing a football jersey, and they refer to him as only having one eyebrow, so that's pretty funny.
Yeah, he does have a unibrow. I really like the banter and dialogue in this movie. It's really well written, and it's funny. Oh, they reference Walt Disney being... Okay, so I guess the plot, I should mention, is that to get into this frat, they're dared to go, steal a body. And they end up referencing Walt Disney, and he's frozen, right? Or he has his head frozen?
Walt Disney has a frozen head in real life?
Yeah, he actually paid to have his head cryogenically frozen. So when the science is available to bring people back to life like that, Walt Disney will be walking around.
Oh, great. Hopefully he doesn't have slugs in his head and shoot him out of his mouth.
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting to think about how, this movie, when it was written, and I mean, I guess even decades later, the default is always white males. I don't think there's a single person of color within these dudes. There's the janitor, who ends up being kind of a cliche character, a stereotype, but any of these main characters could have been changed, but it's not. It's just like all these white dudes. The thing I do appreciate, though, is that they had one of the two main guys be disabled, and he walks with crutches, and they never explain why or anything. It's just part of his character, and that's fine. So that's something I did appreciate.
Yeah, yeah, and it was the classic kind of like Revenge of the Nerds, like the nerdy outcast guys are kind of up against the fraternity, so they get they get the best of them using their brains, I guess.
You know, I speaking of that, I've never seen Revenge of the Nerds.
I think you have to get out more.
Or get in more, I guess. Now, a lot of this movie takes place in a college dorm. Mark, tell us about your college dorm experience.
Yeah, very similar. I think the JC character was very similar to my college roommate Luke Hofdahl, except he didn't have crutches.
Nice, okay. You know, they end up waking up this corpse basically. And I think they go back to their dorm room. I think they're pretty calm for having woken up a corpse.
Yeah, they try to, play the prank. They open the wrong door in the science building and they get the cryogenically frozen zombie from 1959. I don't know why they chose to freeze him, but I thought in that scene when they're in that laboratory is pretty interesting. How they used to try to make sophisticated looking computers like back in the 80s is just like as many lights, blinking lights as possible. So kind of like a Star Wars ship or something. There's just like rows and rows of lights and they're just like randomly blinking and like doing all this stuff. So looking back on it, looks a little corny to me.
You know, and I wrote this down for later, but the nice thing about having a movie be a comedy like this is that they can get away with cheesy stuff and it's fine. Like, even though you said it was corny, maybe based on the time, but a lot of stuff that if they were taking themselves seriously, it would be like, oh, that's so bad. Instead, it becomes sort of endearing.
Yeah, and to that point, one thing, the detective Ray is a pretty funny guy, and I think he gets to the scene of where the body that they break out kills a scientist, and Ray looks at him and he goes, "Is this a homicide or a bad B movie?" So that was kind of funny. They were kind of self-aware about what they're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of winks to the audience. I know I'm going to keep complaining about this, but there's only men as police officers in this movie, so that was kind of obnoxious.
There's actually a female cop or two near the end when they're shooting the crazed psychopath who we didn't talk about yet. In the beginning of the movie, you see a young cop in the 50s, and he sees his old high school sweetheart at makeout point, and then they leave, and then later and this is another, classic story about the guy who just escaped from the insane asylum or whatever, and they're listening to it on the radio, and then the guy goes into the woods to look for something, and then you see a barefoot guy with an axe approaching the car, and the cop comes up on that scene and ends up killing the psychopath.
You know, speaking of the main cop, he sort of reminds me of Dennis Farina. He's like a poor man's Dennis Farina, if you know who that is. And I liked his character a lot. Oh, a couple more typical sort of homage characters. There's a coroner who is always eating, and I've found that throughout this year of Horror Rewind, I found that to be sort of a constant. And then this main frat guy, his license plate says Bradster. His name is Brad, and he is a douchebag.
Yeah, the Bradster, babe, the Bradster. Yeah, he was not a very likable guy. He actually comes into a confrontation with the guy with the crutches on campus, and he ends up kicking the guy's crutches so he falls down. So that's pretty weak in my book. But then his sorority girlfriend, Cynthia, does the old Jack in the Box, like wind up give him the finger thing to Brad. So that was kind of funny, I thought.
Yeah, this guy's the worst. And also, can you imagine living in a house with a bunch of roommates like the sorority or this frat? I feel like that would be the worst. And I realized that's why there's always drama on the reality shows where they end up having to live together in a house, because there's just no possible way that all those personalities could mesh. So it's time for my guilty pleasure confession. You have to say it like your art teacher said it.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Mark had an art assignment in college, and that's how his art teacher said, like, draw a picture of your guilty pleasure. And Mark drew a picture of like a Twix bar.
Yeah, because I don't have very good artistic skills, so I felt that would be. I just saw it in a vending machine, so I bought it and then I drew it. So I think I got a B or an A in the class. So I mean, just got to do the work and try your best. You can't make up for a lack of talent.
Okay, well, that was a nice little shout out and advice to all college students out there, or just anybody in life. But okay, so my guilty pleasure is watching America's Next Top Model. I'm watching old seasons on Hulu right now, and there's a lot of drama in those houses. Like, people are fighting all the time.
Yeah, for how many people were living in these houses, there didn't seem to be that much drama. Everyone seemed to be pretty friendly with each other. So, but they didn't get into the characters too deeply, so I could be way off on that.
You know, this movie has multiple plots. There's this meteor, there's the aliens, the axe murderer, the slugs turn them into zombies. There's just all this regular plot with like the frat and the sorority and relationships. It's got a lot going on, but it all comes together and works.
Yeah, and there's the love story between Chris and Cynthia. So I mean, it's not just a horror movie; it's a comedy, it's a sci-fi movie. It's got a lot of things going on.
So the slugs are pretty gross, and I wrote down something about a gross cat. So the cat must have been possessed by the slugs at some point and be disgusting. And then there's this zombie dog at towards the end of the movie, and I love it. It's so funny and cheesy but adorable.
Yeah, the Bradster. Cynthia breaks up with the Bradster because he's kind of a douche, and he's drunk in front of the sorority, and he sees one of the slugs slither by, and then he sees the dog, and he kneels down, he's like, "Hey, doggy, did you see that?" And he looks at the dog, and the dog's like missing an eye, and the dog looks at him, and it goes like woof, and then a slug pops out of the dog's mouth right into Brad's mouth. So Brad got what was coming to him.
Yeah, it's a nice moment.
So then Brad, in a matter of minutes, turns into one of these. I don't know if zombie is the right word for what they are, but the slugs get into your brain, so they're attracted to brain, so they get into your brain, and that's how they reproduce. So Brad pretty much is what we'll call a zombie, and he comes up to the door, and they think he's playing a joke, so Cynthia comes out to talk to him, and she's like holding his hand. He's like, it's just, she never really looks at him, so she's like having this one-way conversation with the zombie about, why their relationship didn't work out.
It's pretty great. And reading the literature about this movie, they do refer to them as zombies, so they're mind-controlling slugs that turn you into a zombie.
We'll go with zombie then. Another thing I remember from watching the movie was his JC, Chris's roommate, learns how to kill these things when he's going to the bathroom, public restroom in the college. He sees the slugs going around, and I don't know why he had matches or something, but
he just found them on the floor.
Oh, okay, so he finds some matches on the floor, and he is trying to light it, and one's trying to get him, and he lights it, and if you just touch these things with fire, they just immediately just combust. So he finds out what kills him, but then as he lost his crutches, and he's like, with his elbows, he's like crawling across the bathroom floor, and there's all these slugs everywhere, and then you see one come right at him, and it goes in his mouth, so he becomes one. He somehow has enough sense to know the things in his brain, it's getting him. He says he can feel it moving in there. So he makes a recording for his roommate telling him what happened. He feels like he's going to die, and that fire kills him. So I remember from watching the movie when I was a kid, that the whole scene, and while he was doing it, I was kind of saying it word for word. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's funny how some of these things really stick with you. That scene and listening to the recording, it's very sweet. He tells his friend that he loves him. He is trying to save him. What was the other? Oh, he says because he's a zombie now, he was able to walk with his own legs, which was really sweet. And I really appreciated that. It was like a good dude friendship, and it felt honest and sincere.
Yeah, and he also said good luck with Cynthia. So, I mean, he was caring about his friend in his moment of knowing he was about to die. And he also went down to the furnace room and basically, I don't know how he killed himself or whatever, but he burned all the slugs that were going to come out of his head so he didn't spread the disease at all.
Yeah, he sacrificed himself for the greater good. There's a nice montage of everyone getting ready for this dance, and all the dude bros are drinking and they have their cummerbunds, and it's really perfect for the era. And they get on this bus, and all the women are getting ready. It's a great classic sort of montage.
Yeah, I also remember that scene from watching it. You know, you got the bro guy waiting by the bus, like taking roll call, and he's like, "Come on, bros, we gotta go." And then he gets on the bus. He's like, "We're gonna get done, dudes." So it's pretty funny. But on the way to the sorority to pick up the girls, the demon dog purposely, apparently, got out in front of the bus and forced it to crash, which resulted in, and then it got on the bus, and that resulted in all the frat bros becoming zombies. So that made for a pretty good final scene.
It was great. I really appreciated that. And as everything goes down, all of these dudes die and nobody seems to really care, and it felt really good to like see all these douchebags sort of get it in the end.
Yeah, no one really seemed to be shedding too many tears about the sorority being blown up or all these frat guys perishing in a bus crash. And then the main detective Ray he like confessed to murdering the psychopath, and he had actually buried the guy from 1959 in a vacant lot before the sorority was built. Then they built the house mother's house right over where he buried the guy, the axe murderer, and apparently he buried him also with the axe. So the house mother, this old lady's watching TV and she's kind of falling asleep, and all of a sudden the floor starts breaking underneath her, and she just kind of looks, but she didn't. If it was me, I would have left, but this axe breaks through the floor, and this skeleton with an axe comes out of the floor, and she's just staring at it, and it just kills her. And that's actually her dog, I believe, that turns into the demon. So it's pretty interesting.
And when we talk about it, like when we say it out loud, there are so many elements. Like it doesn't sound like it should come together and work because there's so many threads, but it does for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe I forgive a lot because it's this like homage and this comedy, but it all comes together.
Yeah, and there's a few nice little things. Like, this isn't a nice thing, but it's a nice way to tie the plot together. The cop Ray was gonna kill himself in his apartment with by turning the gas stove on and then lighting a lighter. And not to give too much away about the movie, but at the very end of the movie, he ends up in the basement of the sorority, and he turns the gas on, and because one of the sorority sisters is storing all these brains down there for an experiment, so all the slugs are down there, and he pretty much kills himself the same way he was going to kill himself, but he kills thousands of these slugs in the process.
Yeah, it was a nice little like callback or tie-in to that.
There's a lot of cool kill scenes in the movie, and a lot of cliche one-liners. One was one of the zombies was crawling towards the guy, and he was out of ammo, and the flamethrower had gone out, but he had a lawnmower, so he started the lawnmower, and I think he said "thrill me" or something like that, and then he tipped it up and drove it right into the zombie's head. Another one was Ray was reaching for a gun. He finally got the gun, and he goes, "It's Miller time," and he shot like 5 of them, so it's pretty funny.
I don't know if he said "thrill me" with the lawnmower. He said that at the end, like about the detective. Did he say it twice?
Yeah, I'm probably wrong on that. He said something. Maybe it had something to do with cutting grass or something like that, but yeah, there's a lot of one-liners before kills in the movie.
Yeah, it's very clever, fun dialogue and one-liners, as you mentioned, and yeah, that classic line of the cop looks out the window and says, "Oh, good news, ladies, your dates are here. Bad news is they're dead," and they're because all these bros are descending upon the house in their cummerbunds and bow ties. It's pretty funny.
I think it was the janitor. He was a witness to the scientist's death, and he was Japanese, I think. And all he would say is screaming like banshees. He kept saying it. I think that was just so you had some context to who the guy was before he died in like 2 minutes later. So they did a lot of that in this movie where they set something up and like a minute later it came into play. So
I was reading about the original ending in the theaters was that when they're watching the house burn, that zombie dog comes up to Cynthia and she goes down to pet it or she looks at it and then a slug jumps from the zombie dog at Cynthia and then the screen goes black. But the alternate ending, which they did not show in theaters, but we just happened to watch on Shudder, was that the slugs or some of these slugs got away and are entering the cemetery, and then we see the alien ship over the cemetery. So we're assuming, that they're going to bring back the dead.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to make of that ending because that spaceship is like right over the cemetery. Maybe they're trying to beam them back up to the ship, or I don't know, or maybe they're just going to infect that whole cemetery and it's just going to be an all-out nightmare and the whole Earth is going to be infested with these things. So it's hard to say, and I don't know if they ever made a sequel or not. So
yeah, I need to look that up. Speaking of flamethrowers, they use flamethrowers to kill these things. You can now buy a flamethrower. They're for sale. I can't imagine what people would use them for, safely or otherwise, but anyway.
Actually, when I was a kid, my friend's dad was kind of a gun nut, and he actually owned a flamethrower, and we had a big bonfire at their house, and he started it with a flamethrower. So that's what you can use a flamethrower for.
Okay, holy crap, I stand corrected. I do not recommend, though, that we average people with not huge space to build bonfires get flamethrowers, but
Just a few funny little things from the movie that I noticed. I think the first zombie that breaks into the sorority, he's holding a rose and he like breaks through the door and he tries to give it to a girl. So I mean, I thought that was kind of funny. And also, I think it was the same zombie that he kind of escaped from the morgue, and this cop is kind of like looking down at some paperwork and he just sees somebody walk by him and he's like, "Have a good night." So it's kind of funny that these cops are so inept that they just let a zombie walk right past them and they just don't notice anything.
Yeah, it's funny.
One more thing I noticed, and this goes back to the Friday the 13th movies, and it's actually happened every time they show somebody dropping a deuce, so to speak. They never end up wiping themselves. So usually because there's a reason, but in this one the slugs are everywhere, and the JC guy is quickly puts his pants back up, so he doesn't have time to wipe.
Yeah, you have noticed that reoccurring theme, and I mean, I guess what would have to be happening where you wouldn't wipe your butt? Maybe slugs or zombies coming at you. I don't know.
I would always do it. I don't care.
I know. I feel like it's just sort of second nature. You just would have to.
Yeah. I just couldn't not feel clean. You know what I mean? Even if a slug's gonna jump in my mouth.
Even if you're about to die. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Night of the Creeps, Mark?
I like the music. A lot of the 50s. A lot of 50s music, and I noticed even in the sorority montage, or when Cynthia's coming down the stairs, they're playing a 1950s song and not like a 80s song. But I can't remember what song it was. But yeah, there's a lot of good 80s music in it, and a lot of good '80s hair, '80s mustaches, a lot of mullets. So yeah, let's just a lot of good stuff going on here.
It reminds me of my cousins who were like 10 years older than me. They would have been going to prom around this time, and just yeah, it looked exactly like my cousins. So we have to rank Night of the Creeps on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being you hated it, 10 being a perfect movie. And do you think the thing to rank, should we use those slugs?
Yeah, I was thinking we could go Bradsters, but
Okay, Bradsters, is it this car or him himself?
him.
All right. So on a scale of 0 to 10 Bradsters, how many do you give Night of the Creeps?
I give it nine Bradsters. It was a good mix of comedy, horror, sci-fi, romance. You could almost argue that it's a romantic comedy. But yeah, I watched this movie probably 50 times when I was a kid. So I don't know why when you're a kid you seem to watch the same movies over and over again, and then when you become an adult you watch a movie once and you're like, even if you really liked it, there's no chance you'd ever watch it again. But no, everything I remembered from when I was a kid was there, and I noticed a lot of new stuff. So I really liked it.
That's awesome. Okay, so I do not have that same nostalgia, of course, for this movie because this is the first time I saw it. I would give it a 7, which I think is pretty solid on my scale because it surprised me. I think it's a good movie. The things that I didn't like about it are probably just a sign more of the times and the era that it was made instead of, the quality or whatever. I think there should have been more women in different roles. But, yeah, it was pretty solid. I give it a 7 Bradsters.
Yeah, there was a few gratuitous nudity in the sorority montage scene and earlier in the movie for basically no reason. But that was, those were the times, so.
Yeah, I feel like maybe, hopefully, or at least the movies I'm watching now, they don't include just a shower scene or just boobs for the sake of boobs anymore.
And yeah, they didn't show any greased up frat bros during the scene, so I was a little bit disappointed in that.
Me too. It was definitely the male gaze, nothing for the female gaze, unless you consider the Bradster. They didn't even show him shirtless, and no, he's more of a douchebag. Like I said, they remind me of the Trump brothers, and maybe I'm thinking of them more of like the SNL portrayal, which I love. I think that's hilarious. But they just seem like stereotypes.
Definitely, yeah. A lot of stereotyping going on in this movie.
But for the sake of comedy, and I thought it was pretty solid. So this movie reminds me of a movie that your dad really loves, which is called My Boyfriend's Back. And I know I've seen it, but I haven't seen it in a long time. But that's like one of his favorite movies of all time, right?
Yeah, he always says the line that this guy who, I don't even remember the context, but this kid's gonna bring this guy's daughter to the prom, and he's like whatever you do, get her back by 10, and don't eat her flesh or something like that. That's
We might have to have Mark's dad on an episode to talk about My Boyfriend's Back, which is hilarious. And I have to mention too, the first time I met him, he knew I was a big movie fan, and I said, "What would you say your favorite movie is of all time?" And he didn't pick a cinematic masterpiece like Citizen Kane or Gone with the Wind. He said Liar Liar was his favorite. And Mark, you saw it in a theater and you didn't sit by him and you were super embarrassed because you could hear him, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we purposely didn't sit. I think we purposely didn't sit by him because we knew, but he's got like a high-pitched laugh and he's like, ha, 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 like the whole movie. So we were, pretty glad we didn't sit near him for that one.
That's funny. And yeah, he and my dad have a lot of similar movie tastes, like with their comedies. But anyway, that was a little side note.
And he's also a big Austin Powers fan, and I just wanted to quickly mention that Vern Troyer recently passed away, so our thoughts are with his family and friends.
Wow, okay, R.I.P. Vern Troyer. Thanks, Mark. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us this week, and thanks for bringing this movie to my attention. Maybe you'll join us again sometime.
Yes, definitely. I love watching these movies where you actually have to think more about it and take notes and really try to notice more stuff. So anytime I'll be on here.
Thanks. Well, have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you in the horror section.